Welcome to Performance Dynamics, the podcast where we dive deep into the intricate factors that drive success in sports and business. Join your hosts Garreth, Ewing and myself, Jo Mountford, as we explore the mental strengths, mindset skills, and psychological dynamics that elevate performance. Welcome to our third episode of our podcast on performance dynamics. In this episode, we dive deep into the topic of post-performance blues, a phenomenon commonly experienced by athletes, fans, and communities after the thrill of an Olympic Games or a big performance when it fades away. Join us as we explore the main psychological effects athletes face following major competitions, including feelings of emptiness and loss. We'll discuss practical strategies athletes can use to cope with the transition from the intensity of training and competition back to their everyday life. We'll also examine the vital role that support systems such as families, coaches, and teammates play in helping athletes achieve after the Games. And as we look forward to the next episode, we'll touch on the importance of finding a new purpose and share effective tips for managing the transition as you reset for future training or reframing your goals for your future. Tune in for valuable insights and heartfelt conversations that resonate beyond the podium. Our listeners are encouraged to support the podcast by subscribing to the Beat It with Jo YouTube channel. Please find our social media links in the transcript for both Jo Mountford and Garreth Ewing. Thank you for listening. Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast. Today, Garreth and I will be talking about the post-competition blues that athletes or businessmen or whoever it is feel after a huge project or competition or performance. And so that is what we're going to discuss. And then in our second episode, we're going to talk about possible coping mechanisms that one can look at in order to cope better and manage better. So welcome again, Garreth, and I really look forward to our discussion today.
Thanks, Jo. Nice to see you again. And I think such an important conversation this, because no matter what the peak of experience is, there's always going to be a come down, and how we experience it and how we manage it and how we're willing to share it with others is such an important thing for in any performance space.
I agree with you. And I think we're very fortunate to have you to explain your own personal journey when you were the South African men's hockey coach. And you've spoken to me before about the build-up leading up to a huge competition and then what it felt like for you coming down. Well, post. So maybe if you could just share your experience of letting people know about like all the sacrifices and the attention that goes into like a World Cup, for example, and then your experience of the blues.
Yeah. So I mean, as we've spoken about in our last couple of episodes, you have this huge build up and you have this kind of anticipation of what's going to happen, and you know first of all you're building a team, you're building a program, you're training, you're getting selected, you're having all these deep conversations, there's the anxiety around that, and then you make the team, and then you start preparing for the tournament, and then there's the build up, and there's the issues around whatever it might be, fundraising or going into camp and getting leave and leaving your family. And then you get to the event, and then there's the intensity of competition and this culmination of all the effort, which leaves you on a high, and then it stops.
So can I just interrupt you there? Because every day you would have had goals. Every day you would have had purpose. Every day you would have had whatever your team goal was, there would have been intentional focus and many things, activities in order to achieve those goals. Okay, sorry, and then it ends.
Not at all. Yeah, and you're right, Jo. That it's the life is lived on a schedule, Life is lived in consideration of all of the team's needs, not just your own. Life is led on what time you wake up, what time are you going to eat, what time are you going to team talk, what time are you going to train, what time are you going to go to gym. These things all add up, and to a point, you don't have to think for yourself in that space. It's taken care of. I think it's like almost like having a PA, I guess, where your day is set out for you. It's on your desk when you arrive at work and you follow it. And yes, and then it stops. And so you have this emotional come down where you feel like your cup is completely emptied, and you return, you get on the plane, and there's always all the logistics, even the logistics of leaving an event and going back home also carry you, because it's stuff that just has to happen and it just flows and you're part of it. And then you get home and you arrive home, you put your bags down, and now what? What are you going to do today? For some people in the amateur space, of course, sometimes some people go straight to the office from the airport and they dive straight back in. And in many respects, they are fortunate because a schedule is now again in place, and they can kind of return to the rhythms of everyday life, and they have somewhere to be. They've got things that have to be done, and they can get on with it, and it allows them time to ease back in. Of course, that doesn't give them the space to process, and there is an emotional processing that needs to happen around this. But I remember having conversations with a number of athletes, and they all just said, like, it's already time for preseason hockey, and I'm like, I just can't face it. Like, I can't pick up a hockey stick. I need more time. And there's all sorts of things at play here. There's mourning at play here. There's just needing rest and recovery. There's a little bit of depression. There's an emptiness because your day was filled with adrenaline, and now where is the adrenaline going to come from?
Gareth, you mentioned the word mourning, and that makes me, when we talk about the mourning process, the first stage in the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's grieving process is denial. And it's the denial that it's over, right? And funnily enough, I have the privilege of talking to Erin Christie yesterday, who is the South African ladies hockey captain. And she said to me, she didn't use the word denial, she used the word surreal. She said it felt surreal, as if it didn't happen, like the Olympics didn't happen, because she's just come back from the Olympics. So it was like she has to pinch herself that she was there meeting the Alcarazes, the Nadals of the world, the people that you've idolized for so long. So the complete overwhelm of such a huge event. She's still, 6 weeks later, she says it feels surreal. She didn't use the word depressed. She said very low and unmotivated. And that's what you spoke about just now. The thought of pitching up to a practice with your hockey stick is not even there. She spoke about the joy of being able to go for a long run. You also spoke about schedules and being on a schedule. And Erin said she started to have to research on YouTube what gym workouts to do. And then she joined CrossFit because that was a structured program that she could follow. And what became evident for me, just as you said there's a schedule, and everybody within the team, if you're a manager, a coach, a physio, a doctor, a player, everybody's got a role to play. And you're relying on other people to do their jobs, and you've got your job to do. But now when you're man alone, you've got to be the jack of all. And maybe you don't know how to do that new role when you come back from such a big event. It was quite an eye-opener for me and relevant.
Very much so. It resonates with me. it's this again, you're on like an upward slope, and you get there, and the pinnacle is the tournament and the event, whatever it might be, and then you drop down the other side. And you and it's again that question of now what am I supposed to do today? And yes, some people will have a celebration, some people will have a few drinks, have a big party, go to a closing ceremony. That gives you another little bit of a rush of feel good chemicals, and then those empty out of you as well. And it's going back to the mundane. Because the way I used to talk about it is, you'd be at a world level event, and suddenly the next day or 2 days later, you'd be buying groceries, and you'd be walking down the grocery aisle, and you'd be like, I haven't had to think about where food is coming from for the last 6 weeks. It's
Yeah.
been there for me,
Yeah.
and it would just arrive. And now here I am thinking about what I'm going to cook for dinner tonight.
Yeah.
And that is a come down. And for me, that was huge. It was always hugely sobering. And it was a
Mm.
struggle.
Yeah.
It was a struggle to pick up the kids from school. And because those things, while they are important, they just don't feel important, because
No.
comparison, you compare where you were, and that surrealness. I mean, I always felt surreal in the space, in the event spaces, because they are just so not the real world. But then when you come back, you get so accustomed to just everything being only one thing, and suddenly it's more than that,
Yeah.
and that I can understand why Erin would say this is surreal, because it's having to think about stuff that you just have put to one side. And that requires, I think, an element of mindfulness to get through that. And your brain is saturated, your body is tired, and it needs a little bit of space before it can start doing the mundane again.
Yeah. And I think you talk about that mindfulness. It's the acceptance that getting the revs down is vitally important for recovery. But before we get into that, I want to talk about when you talk about the loss, the second stage of loss is anger. And um, I'm I'm wondering, look, when you come back from such a big event and you've been with a team and you're all talking the same language and you're all sharing the same experiences, and you come back home and everyone is so excited for you and they're so amped about it, yet there's an element of irritation, or let's call it anger, like you weren't there, you don't get it, and you're feeling low, so you don't feel like sharing your vibe with people that don't understand. Is that something that you can resonate with?
I can, and to my eternal shame, I remember going to my parents' house for a lunch, and all they wanted to do was find out about the Olympics and find out what the village was like, and what, we saw this on TV, and was it really like this? And I just couldn't, I wasn't bothered. Like I didn't want to talk about it. And that was my exact attitude, is, yeah, you weren't there, you won't get it. It's meaningless to you. I don't, there's no point in me telling you about this. And of course, that's an unhelpful response to the people who've invested in you for a very long time, and who are so excited to see you achieve, and to achieve that thing that they know you've been working hard for very long, because nobody knows as much as the people that are closest to you what you go through.
Yeah.
And I'm still ashamed of that. Of course, we've had the conversation since, and we've had a chance to share the experiences. But in the immediacy of it, it was like, and that's the emotional response, is there's an element of us against them. When you're in your emotional state, you don't have any emotional resources you can't process. You're going to have that kind of conflict, and that kind of, it's almost like resentment. Like, this is not, how dare you ask me that question? So
Yeah.
it does resonate with me. And
Is there a level of arrogance, like we're above you, we're above you all, you weren't there, you don't get it?
yeah, for me, it wasn't arrogance. It was just a case of, this is not something that I can adequately describe to you. You're not going to understand it. So let me not
Okay.
bother.
Yeah.
which certainly
And
is.
and Gareth,
Yeah.
the other stage, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the other one is bargaining. Was there ever, if only I could just go back one more time, or if I could only have that experience one more time, or if only, that whole if only, it's all part of the loss process.
Totally. I definitely bargained. I bargained where I was, it's okay. In 6 weeks, we're going to get back together for a camp. I can start getting excited about that. Um, you know, in whatever, it's only 6 months to the World Cup. Let me just keep going here. Let me get through all this crap, buying groceries next, it just, and then I can escape again. So very much part of that. And that's also that I used to talk about it as a wave. You're at the top of the wave, and you come down to the middle ground, which is where you want to live, but you go straight through that into the bottom of the wave. Then you pick yourself back up again because you start to get excited, and then you forget about the middle again because you're aiming for the top.
Okay.
And that cycle, of course, contributing to burnout and resentment and disconnect from simplicity.
Yeah, and very short-lived joy. Yeah,
Yes.
just huge
Yes.
pendulum swings of emotion. Okay, so just for anybody else listening, is that the other two stages are depression, which you can totally understand, and then a level of acceptance. Okay, it's over, and we're back into the real life stuff. But the reality is, it doesn't end there. It can go back straight back to depression or anger, or those emotions continue until you've processed it and you give time the healing the time it deserves. You eventually reach a level of acceptance.
And I think the reality is that dip, I've experienced all those things, and I remember having the conversation with my wife Mandy that it is a mourning process because you're never going to have it again. You had it and it's gone and it's never coming back. And there may be other opportunities which you chase, but that unique experience is never coming back. And it's not just limited to sport. You can see it in people who achieve pinnacles of performance. What is it? 11, 10, 12 people have walked on the moon, or not even, like 6, 8 people have walked on the moon. Like they went through that journey as well. Okay, well, I've achieved everything that Western civilization can achieve from a scientific point of view. What do I do now? Or a business person who works on an amazing project and sees it from start to finish. It's like, okay, now I'm just going back to the office. What am I doing now? What's the next thing? And it becomes, again, a cycle of chasing performance, but that acceptance and appreciation. I think the next thing, I know in this case acceptance, but I think also appreciate what happened, to actually take the time to go, that was good. I did my best. I worked really hard. I'm sad it's over, but now I can look forward to other things. Is that reframing process around what it is and what it looks like. And the recovery process. I think we're so, again, performance-based people always want to be up here, but that's not where life is supposed to be lived. Life is supposed to be lived here so that we can perform better when we do go up there.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
to keep that perspective.
And Gareth, I think it's so relevant for people in transitional stages of life. So if we think about children that are in their last, or young adults who are in their last year of school, and everything at the moment is all guns firing for their academic performance, and then there's change. And for some people, they are desperate to leave school, but for others, there's loss, and there's a new role to play. But there are so many of those where you're focused so fully on something, and then it ends, and there's a bit of a disappointment. It's a bit flat. But in that acceptance process that we speak about, it's time, I think, to shift from me to we, because you didn't get there on your own. And there's been such a support team around you that it's probably time for gratitude and appreciation. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday on an Australian swimmer and the interviewee was asking her, you know, have you had time for recovery, and have you thought about getting back into the pool and resetting your goals and that? She said, I haven't had time for recovery because I'm having to do a lot of work for the sponsors. So, and she didn't sound ungrateful. It just sounded like a real duty, but she wouldn't have got there without the sponsors. Do you know what I mean? So she still realizes she needs time alone. She needs time to do absolutely nothing so that she can replenish and get going.
Yeah, and what is recovery? It's different for everybody, but we do know that there are elements of rest, creativity, something different. Where do you go and find those things? You know, for elite athletes, that particular sport, it's their job. You know, for us civilians, it's our entertainment in most respects, but it's actually just their job. And they need to do it consistently, but they also need their leave, so to speak. You need your 2 weeks leave or whatever it might be to recharge your batteries. And how do we recharge? And of course, we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next episode. But it's important to understand that you need rest, and you are not going to be at your best. You've pushed yourself to be at your best for months or weeks. That 3 weeks afterwards or the day afterwards, whatever it might be, you're not going to be at your best. And it's okay to just accept that and be kind to yourself, to know that you're going to take time.
And Garreth, I think with the high performance personality and the person that is pushing boundaries all the time and looking for the next record or time or searching for a place in a team or whatever it is, it's like having your foot on the accelerator all the time. To say to that person, just take a day to relax. That is like, they do not understand that, and it also doesn't feel comfortable. It doesn't feel like I can sit with my thoughts, I can sit with the rush, because I often feel, well, again, I was listening to another podcast on a rower, an American rower, and he said his performance came from a place of anger and anxiety. And now that transition, because the next thing I want to talk about is how can athletes cope with the transition from intense training to everyday life. And now that was going to be unhelpful for him in everyday life, to be angry and operating from a place of anxiety, because often, well, anxiety can go two ways. But if you operating from a place of anxiety that's pushing all the time, you're going to ruffle a lot of feathers around you. If it's for your own, if you're on your own and you're doing an individual sport or individual whatever you're doing, it suffices for that performance. So I know I'm kind of talking round and round, but how can athletes cope with the transition from intense training and the intensity like you had in competition? I think that's something that we can talk about and think about. We are going to discuss the transition process in episode 4, where we talk about how one can shift from the intense training to just normal everyday living. So because I think it's a big thing. I think it's a big thing, mind and body, to make that shift. Like when I was talking to Erin, she said she was going to go and play tennis with her husband, and that was going to be her training for the day and her exercise for the day, and that's big. And being okay with just going to the gym for 1 hour. Like, for that person, it's just not enough, but there's that level of acceptance that it's okay. It's okay for now. Yeah.
And experiencing exercise as recreation as opposed to exercise as some kind of preparation or performance. It's a shift for a lot of people, a lot of athletes. And you'll see how I can see it in some of my friends who've even been out of elite level sport for years and years, who still train like they're in the middle of something. So yeah, it's a shift. It's a shift, and it's something that it'll be nice to look for, to talk about in our next episode. And I think the big thing here is for those who are experiencing the drop off after the intensity of competition, is to be kind to yourself. And for those who are close to someone who's going through that experience, to also give them their space and understand that they need time to recover.
Yeah. I think that's it, the open communication. And if people, but again, Gareth, and you note that unless you've got the awareness of what you're feeling, you then don't have the emotional vocabulary to communicate that to your loved ones, to your work colleagues, to the people around you. But I really like what you said about that your exercise is for health, mental well-being, and enjoyment. And it's not in preparation for something. It's part of holistic well-being. And I think that is a huge shift. Even if I think of when I first started doing yoga, I thought, this is not exercise. And until I could shift that it wasn't exercise in my brain, that it was for my mental health and well-being, then I just embraced it wholeheartedly. But it is a shift in your mind that's what it has to be. And there's no quick fix to that. There's no quick fix to that.
Yeah, it's the story you tell yourself, and your motivation for doing something in the first place. And that will shift. That will shift from competition to recreation to recovery, whatever it may be.
Purpose. Reframing your purpose, right? Gareth, a question I want to ask you, because I realized when I spoke to Erin, I said to her, and she didn't have the answer, would it be helpful in preparation, in your pre-competition preparation, to have this conversation, to set aside time to have a plan for life after the competition? What does life look like? What could it look like? Put plans and goals in place. And the reason that we both were not sure is because does it become a distraction? And when would be the right time to have that conversation? Because theoretically, I think you have to have that conversation, and especially if the person is retiring, especially if it's their last gig. What do you think? Being on the professional stage as the coach, would you think it's interfering? I mean, I know 100% you would agree with having it, but what would the timing be?
Yeah, I think it's such a good question, and it's definitely not when you're in that final runway towards achieving the goal of performance, because that's what you're working towards. These are the conversations, these are the things that need to happen well ahead of time. So we spoke earlier about being in a cycle of preparation, performance, recovery. These things, if you train these things as well, you're training that cycle. We're doing it ahead of time, so that then that's when you're going to have those conversations, when you need to be single-minded when you're going to your season defining event or your cycle defining event. That's not the time to think about retiring, because your goal is a maximum performance. Your goal is not to retire in that moment. But if you've already got it in the back pocket in terms of, what will I be doing when I walk away from this? What will I be doing when I'm just recovering for those 2 weeks after an event? That can be done ahead of time. And that is a helpful conversation to have, because it's going to help you with that reset and with that reframe. After you've had your closing ceremony and your closing party, and you've said your goodbyes to your teammates, you can then turn your attention towards what you know you're going to be doing next, as opposed to that, what I said earlier, waking up going, okay, what now?
Yeah.
And just having that as a little in your back pocket, so to speak. Yeah.
And Gareth, we're going to be talking about tools in our next episode on strategies that you can have managing life after a big event. But for everybody out there, both Garreth and I are coaches. And I think if people have the support of someone like ourselves in their wings, so that you have that conversation and that you have that person connected to that person post a big event, that you can connect with them and you can talk about how you're feeling. And then when the time's right, these are the things we have in place. We've already put these in place, and let's help you and support you through this process. Would that have been helpful for you if you had someone immediately afterwards?
Totally. And it's something I want to bring up in the next episode, but it is that who do you work through your debrief with? It's not just the final team meeting before you pack your bags and head home. It's where's the debrief coming a little bit further down the line, just to unpack, to share the experience, to remind yourself that you have the tools. In your case, gazing red to blue, and strengths. In my case, strengths. The language exists to help you process, to remind yourself of what you have inside you. And that's essentially what a lot of it is about. And that's where the coaching aspect comes in, is who you're having that conversation with, to remind you of what you have.
Yeah, exactly. Because those skills that you have and have developed as a sports person can be translated so beautifully into other skills later. And we can definitely support you with that. So we're going to end our podcast there. But what I really would like to ask the audience is, if you share any experiences that we've spoken about, it would be so amazing to hear from you. And we would even invite you onto a podcast to come and share, because I think what we're going to talk about in our next podcast is the support that's required. So the more we talk, the more we share, the more we ask questions, the more we can support you on this journey. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And we look forward to connecting with you in our next podcast.
Cheers, Joe. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Garreth. Thank you.
Please be advised that this podcast discusses topics related to mental well-being, personal experiences, and societal issues. The views and opinions expressed by the host and the guests are personal and may not reflect the views of everyone in the community. While we aim to inspire and support, please remember that individual experiences with mental health and sports can vary significantly. If you or someone you know is facing challenges related to mental health or requires support, we strongly encourage seeking professional help. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we hope you find motivation and encouragement in our conversation.